This podcast is produced by The Brand is Female.
Always with me.
Tansei, hello. My name is Shayla Stonechild, and welcome to the Matriarch Movement podcast. I'm speaking to you from the unceded traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. Every week on the show, I share stories of Indigenous women from Turtle Island and beyond to challenge the mainstream narrative around Indigenous identity and offer up a new category of role models so that the next generations may thrive. We'll put a spotlight on issues facing Indigenous women and explore how we can reclaim our voice, our body, and our spirit and our power that have been silenced and stolen throughout history and humanity. If you like this podcast, don't forget to subscribe on the platform of your choice. Now, let's get to this week's conversation. Tansei, hello, and welcome to the Matriarch Movement podcast. I'm your host, Shayla Stonechild, and I'm super excited to be here today with Tenille. Tenille Campbell is a Dene and Métis author from English River First Nation in northern Saskatchewan. She completed her MFA in creative writing from UBC and is enrolled in her PhD program at University of Saskatchewan. Her poetry book, #Indian Love Poems, is an award-winning collection of poetry that focuses on Indigenous erotica, using humor and storytelling to reclaim and explore ideas of Indigenous sexuality. Her upcoming collection, nedi, nezu, through Arsenal Press, is coming in March 2021. She is also the artist behind sweetmoon photography and the co-creator of the women's blog Tea and Bannock. Welcome to the podcast, Tenille. I know my Cree language messed up your pronunciation of your book. So if you want to actually, if you want to correct. If you want to correct that introduction, you can
I really will. No, everything was great. And you pronounced the book nedi, nezu.
Yeah.
And I'm always like kind of laughing because when I'm talking to like people not from the res or people like that I didn't grow up with, I always say it like nedi, nezu, which is like very Caucasian.
I have to say.
Yeah. And when I'm like with like other BIPOC people, I'm like nedi, nezu. And they're like, ooh.
I know. I definitely need to get that flavor through my tongue. I definitely do not have that. And I even noticed like on the podcast itself, code switching, how I have like my white voice.
I know, well, code switching. We all do. Like my friends laugh at me because we'll be driving around the city, in a COVID world with our Starbucks, just like judging everyone. And then I'll get a phone call. And I'll go from like my super laid back, chill voice to like, "Hi, Tenille Campbell. How can I help you?" And I'm like, "Who is she?"
Literally, I'm the same way. I'm like, okay, this is my Métis coming out. This is my French side. Anyways, how have you been? It's been a minute since we've actually connected. I think the last time I saw you was like, oh gosh, probably longer than a year ago.
I think so. It might have been that like brunch down by the docks.
Yeah, I like 2 years ago. Wow. Yeah. So how have you been?
Well, like nothing's changed, but everything's changed. Personal, still in school, still writing, still a mom, still single forever. In a good way. I'm not bemoaning the fact. And then, of course, like new book, surviving in a COVID world, seeing what that looks like, dealing with people who don't believe in COVID and masks and how that like low key infuriates me and trying not to let it, like just being like, okay, you're not in my bubble. Like,
yeah, you're not in my six.
Yeah. So it's just been like a steady, chill vibe that I'm actively trying to keep it at. I'm not pursuing too much and I'm not pursuing too little, just trying to stay mentally busy.
Well, you just had your newest book released, didn't you? That was in March, so like this month.
It is,
How is it?
I will mention it for like the 100th time if you follow me on social media. It is my birthday month.
Are you a Pisces or are you an
Yes,
Aries?
I
Oh,
am a
you're a
Pisces.
Pisces? What? Same. I had no idea.
This is why we vibe.
Sweet. And what is this book? What can we expect in this book? Because I have your first one, the love poems, and honestly, every time I read it, I just feel really single. Like,
Oh my God, we're using that as a quote.
literally, like creeping your Instagram page this morning, I was like, "Damn, I'm the most single I've ever been." And I want to blame it on the pandemic, but I also want to blame it. I'm like, maybe it's just because I haven't talked to Tenille and got like her advice.
You just need that chaotic energy. Sometimes, like, I feel like my trickster form is like bringing that energy around. Going back to our original point, nedi, nezu, like, Indian love poems, and I find Indian love poems is the welcoming into this discussion, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's cheerful, it's joyful, it's tongue in cheek, it's very self-deprecating. Like, I laugh at myself a lot about it to invite other people into the discussion, for sure. And I feel like nedi nezu is the next step in this discussion. If Indian love poems is tea around the table, nedi nezu is drinks once the lights have gone down. It's a little more political. It's a little more layered. There's a lot more darkness to contrast with the joy. And I think it's like a really good step in the discussions that we have to take. And it was deliberately written in a way that people who read Indian love poems can merge into nedi nezu in a way that doesn't feel, trauma based, in a way that doesn't feel like they're getting punched in the head with all of our problems.
Right.
Yeah. Like, I'm leading with love, but I'm also saying there's still some shit we got to work on.
And how was that process for you, writing the second book?
It was brilliant. Indian love poems made me step into the world as a sex advocate, as an image for sexual desire. And I mean, that's multi-layered. And you and I have talked about this, like, as a light-skinned Indigenous person, as a fat Indigenous person, I felt it really weird sometimes to be a marker of Indigenous sexuality. And I was just like, which belly is sexy? Like, all of them? Cool. It took a
But that's what I love about you. It's just like this liberation that, like, I feel like you're in your power and you allow other people. It's like welcoming other people to be like, hey, you can love every single thing about me, regardless of other people's, judgments and expectations that they may have.
completely, like, loving myself had never really been a problem. And I didn't realize how radical that was until I started combining the self-love with, like, sexuality and being like, oh, like, as a plus size, as a fat woman, I'm supposed to be grateful to have sex. Oh, right. And the fact that I wasn't grateful, but actually critical of the processes was interesting and brought some great discussion to the front.
So I like how you challenge people's perceptions or maybe beliefs that they have about Indigenous people, just because you speak with such like not like uncensored, like not really giving shit
You're
what other people
censoring,
think.
and I'm like, not
I know, I'm
giving
like
up.
not giving a shit. And so, how has that process been? Like, what? I don't know. Like, for me, there's tools that I use on a daily basis for me to feel like in my energy, in my worth, in my power. I'm wondering, like, for you, what are your daily rituals, or how did you get to this place of not literally giving a shit of what other people think?
Honestly, I think I just had my heart broken.
Mm,
And that really, I'll say, freed me up. It opened my eyes to seeing how much of myself I was giving my partner
mm,
and how much I was diminishing myself so that my partner would feel safer or
right.
less threatened. And I don't think that's new. I think when I say I lessened myself so he could feel bigger, a lot of women that resonates,
Mm-hmm.
especially if, like, you're independent, if you're strong, if you live a life singly and do it well. This idea of having to become less so they feel like more is not
Mhm.
new.
Mhm.
And seeing myself and being like, damn, what? Who is you?
Who are you?
Exactly. So it took like getting my heart broken and kind of just really critically looking at myself. Because as you know, I have a daughter, she's 9 now, and kind of walking through this world in a way that I'd want her to be proud of me, and understanding for myself that meant I can't let other people's opinions about my body, about my
Mhm.
sexuality, about my education, about my art, affect me. As long as
Mhm.
I'm proud of what I'm doing, my daughter can like look at me and understand that I'm seeking joy in these many factors. I was
Mhm.
like, that's what I
That's
need.
yeah, that's really all that matters. What would your going back to your daughter, what would your advice be? I had this question specifically from someone from on the following, my following. She's asked, what would your advice be to your younger self?
Okay, you gotta understand, like when I was young, I grew up in the res, northern Saskatchewan,
Mhm.
grew up in the res till I was 18. And I think I was just always kind of different in regards to how I dated. I remember at one time being 11, 12, and having a Friday 13th sleepover and with like boys and girls that I was friends with. But I was holding two boys' hands on the couch. And my friend was like, "What are you doing?" And I was just like, "Well, I like both of them. So I'm going to hold both their hands." And she's like, "But you can only like one of them." And I'm like, "Says who?" Like that was my mentality. Like I like both these
Right.
people. I'm gonna hold both their hands. I'm gonna go out with both of them. And that always kind of got me into trouble. Growing up in a smaller town where you're expected to go out with somebody, have 5 kids with them, get married
Yeah.
after you've been dating 10 years, and
Mhm.
and like
Yeah.
no shade. I see Northern love stories and I love them,
Mhm.
but that wasn't my story.
Mhm.
And so like growing up, I think what I would tell myself is just to like lean into it,
Mm.
embrace it.
Mhm.
For too much of my youth, I did worry about what my friends thought, and I did worry about what boys thought, and I did worry about like what people I didn't know thought of me.
Mhm.
Like, why this?
Yeah. I
Ugh.
was literally having this conversation with my brother the other day. I was like, we're given one life. Why do we limit ourselves based on other people's perceptions and like judgments of us when really like we're given one life. So you might as well make the most of it. Um, and so growing up, because you grew up in Saskatchewan.
Mhm.
And so what was that experience like for you growing up in Saskatchewan on the res?
Well, like I will note that I'm from Treaty 10, which is English River First Nation, which is boreal forest. So when I say Saskatchewan, I'm talking like sandy soils, I'm talking like hidden waterfalls, big lake life, forest. None of this rolling prairie wheat skies. It's beautiful, but that's not what I think of when I say Saskatchewan. Um, so growing up in the north, it's a lot more isolated than the south. It's a lot more, BIPOC, Indigenous people, and I grew up in a community that speaks Cree pretty fluently, and I took Cree
Mm.
from grade kindergarten to grade 12. That being said, I still don't speak it.
I was like, wow.
I know,
I
like
need to learn from you.
my accent's pretty good because like I took it and I grew up around Cree people.
Yeah.
But if someone's speaking to me, I'm like, tapwe, tapwe.
Oh, was munya.
Exactly. I'm like, kagush, piggy, kagush. Yeah. So growing up in the north, I think I had a beautiful childhood. I come from a two-parent home. I had 3 brothers. They were all highly active in sports and arts. So we spent a lot of time at the rinks. We spent a lot of time traveling. We spent a lot of time like on a boat and fishing.
Mm.
And like when I think about it, I realize, of course, how blessed and lucky I am.
Mhm.
And then like turned 18 and I moved off the res, right? Went to school.
Mm.
God, I'm still in school. And
Mhm.
I remember the culture shock of moving to a community where everyone was white.
Yeah.
And I was like, damn, like I am light skinned, but this is white, white. Okay.
Right?
Like,
Yeah, I can relate to that. I mean, I grew up in a predominantly white community, so I always felt like I was the other. Like you do feel, for me, I internalized like a lot of shame, and I didn't speak my truth because I felt so like different than everyone else. And I think that's where the people pleasing and the code switching and all that comes into, is because I had to like mold to fit into mainstream society, or I felt like I had to. Going back to, you know, when you started going to school, for me, I've always had such resistance towards going into like colonial institutions because I feel like I don't know, I feel like it's a colonial institution. And so how's it been, you know, getting your PhD, and what have been the challenges, and why? What's your why? What is your why?
well, I joke about this, but like I'm in my 7th, I think, year of my PhD. I'm studying Indigenous literature, specifically Indigenous erotica, through Indigenous women's eyes in Canadian Lent. And I have been in school on and off, like I said, since I was 18, post-sec, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're at a point of my awakening where the university and people have stopped asking me to talk to classes
Because what, you're too uncensored, or what?
I'm too real.
Oh.
I'm not that like, oh my God, we all need to be here. We all need to be doing this. And like, the more of us, the better. I'm like, sure. But now I'm just like, you know what? Don't do it. Like right now, take some time, go get some life experience.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you come back, make sure the university pays for your PhD. You should never put down money for your PhD.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, just also know that this is trauma. Like I have
Mm-hmm.
been through like a lot of shit in my life, and I don't generally use the word traumatic to describe any of it.
Mm.
Like, well, that sucked.
Yeah, that was a
like,
lesson.
yeah, I'm pretty chill about it. But then I think about like the trauma that post-sec has brought me and how it affects me, and I'm like, well, damn.
Yeah.
Damn.
So like your writing has been pretty prominent in your life from when you were 18. Like when did you begin your writing career, or your writing process? Were you always a writer?
I was in grade 5. Funny story. Like context. I was in grade 5 on the res, and I was like, they were like,
Oh, I'm just imagining
oh,
little
I had
Tenille.
like waist length hair, like giant, like, you know, glasses, like the cutest little nerd. I'm not gonna lie. And the teacher, who was white, was just like asking the students, you know, what do you want to be when you grow up? We have to fill out our sheets. And I said a ballerina or a writer. And she was like straight up with me. And she's like, Tenille, like if you're gonna be a ballerina, you need to start taking classes. You need to go into training. People have been dancing for years already at this point. And I was like, I guess I'm a writer.
And here you've been in school for like how long? Like those ballerina classes are probably
I
a lot
could have
less.
been a ballerina by now. My poor daughter is a ballerina.
Oh yeah, I've seen her on your social media.
She has been in dance since she was 3. And she sits there like, can I quit now? And I'm like, no, this is my dream. You're living my
You're like
dream.
living through her.
I was like, when you're 13, you can quit. We'll talk about it then.
Oh my God.
I know, but so I decided to be a writer. And that year, I entered this contest for the Star Phoenix, which is Saskatoon's local newspaper. We had to write a Christmas story. And I wrote a very dramatic Christmas story about Santa coming to the res. And, like, I don't know.
What was Santa doing on the res?
Delivering presents, but he kept getting chased off by like dogs, and like people trying to hunt like the reindeer, and like Jesus was lost. I was 11, okay? And I like won 2nd place.
What? Really? I need to read this piece.
I'll find it
bring
again.
It back.
And then I was like, this writing thing is easy. Look, I'm published.
That was your first publication.
But nobody like in the North kind of knew what that meant to be a writer. So I didn't know what it meant, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I went to
Okay.
like writing camps when my brothers went to hockey camps. I like Googled and found writing camps, and I'm like, this is a thing. I'm honestly still thinking about
Wait, you went
Santa.
from your Santa Claus and reindeers to wait, this is an actual career.
I was like 11, just like, I got published already. I'm an author.
So then you went on to writing camps, and then what happened?
And then I found a creative writing diploma to go to for my first year of college. And again, only Native person in the school. That was fun. And made some great friends, but still, that was interesting. And then honestly, just published small things here and there, like little poems, little whatever. And like I said, it took a major heartbreak for me to kind of find that voice and write about what I want to write about. Because don't get me wrong, after the heartbreak, like I was a petty bitch. And I wrote poetry about the persons that was very negative and very hate filled and very like sneering. And I was just like, this isn't helping me. This isn't healing me. This isn't making me feel good. This doesn't give me joy. And I needed joy. I needed joy. So then once I kind of started looking again for the light in my life and finding it through that very, elementary flirtation, like learning how to flirt again after being taken for 12 years, learning what a date is. And understanding that Native people don't date.
They literally just like
move in,
have a baby, and then get married.
Exactly. And dating non-Indigenous and white people for the first time and facing my own biases and prejudice and once sex and all that fun stuff became involved, realizing that in my head I was just a very small town girl when it came to sexuality. And I was just like, oh, all these things that I had such judgment on before while I was like in this very safe, regular, boring ass relationship, said with love, that's just not going to work for me anymore. I need to like expand my mind. So there was like a lot of growth happening. And it was only through all that Indian love poems came about and the joy came about and the community came about, because this is so relatable.
Yeah, I feel like you can really see the exploration of yourself through your poetry and, and through other people. And so I know some writers have this term, I believe it's called writer's block, or like when you don't know what to write about. Like, so where do you find your inspiration, for the books that you're writing currently, or the book that you just wrote?
Tinder. No, I'm kidding.
Tinder. I'm like, you haven't got Hinge yet? No.
Hinge is just too fancy. Oh my God.
Supposedly you have to put more effort in, so it's better.
I don't know.
This is what I hear.
Like I've like looked through Hinge in Saskatoon and I'm like, it's just the same guys as in Tinder.
Language is pretty like prominent, obviously, in writing. And so there's a lot of language that I feel can only be described to a certain degree through the English tongue, through like the colonizer's tongue. Do you incorporate a bit of like your language, or like how does that feel for you? Do you speak Dene?
No.
Like, do you speak your language? Like before I ask this question,
as we just laugh. No, I don't speak my languages. Like my mom is Métis and she speaks Michif, and my dad's Dene and he speaks Dene. But I don't speak anything but English. But that being said, I had Cree and Dene like words in Indian love poems, and I continued that tradition in nedi, nezu, which means good medicine in Dene. And I took it a step further, having one poem translated into Cree and one poem translated into Dene. And then I had my friends who gave me the translation speak it and record it. So now I'm in the process of constantly just trying to mimic it and speak it, so that when I'm finally ready to speak these poems out loud, I don't get roasted for my accent.
Yeah. Well, I already got roasted at the beginning of this podcast. I couldn't even say your so I'm already there. Yeah. So speaking of language, then, when you hear the idea of, decolonization or like the word matriarch, what do those words, if anything, do they mean something to you?
Well, it's complicated. Like, as a non-language speaker, I'm here obviously for learning our languages and having the opportunity and privilege to learn our languages. Let's not lie, that's still a privilege.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but I feel like when we apply the term decolonized to language learning, it limits the discussion to those who have
Mm-hmm.
the opportunity or only speak their languages. And it
Mm,
takes away the knowledge that we all speak English. And
mm,
why can't this now be? This is me not necessarily being revolutionary, but like just kind of pushing the idea. Why can't English be our new trade language? Why
mm.
can't English be one of those things that connects us instead of marks us as not Indian enough?
Right, right. I see what you're saying.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good way to actually think about it. I've never thought about it like that. Do you resonate then with like the word matriarch? Because I know some people do and some people don't.
I do. Like, I've jokingly used it on myself. Uh, but I mean, like, people have feelings when you use that word on
Yeah,
yourself. Yeah,
totally.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I see like the matriarch, I see the women leaders, I see the femme leaders, I see our two spirit leaders, I see like all our like non-binary femme women and that power that they hold. And matriarch is as good as word as any. It's
Mhm,
identifiable, it's a unifier, and I'm here for it. Let's use it.
mhm. Are you currently inspired by like any matriarchs within your own community or on social media, in writing?
No, no, I'm kidding. As always, Erica Violet Lee. If you don't know her, you should know her. She's on Instagram and Twitter. Such an advocate for urban Indigenous space and youth and ideas. And I think that's something that we have to acknowledge, that like all urban spaces were and are still Indigenous space. And that's something that she has just completely taught me, that has been like, oh, right, I'm an idiot. Okay.
Mhm,
Thank you. Um, Ariel Twist, she's an emerging
mm,
poet out of Halifax and a positive sex like person as well, who has taught me so much about how we negotiate these conversations about positive sexuality.
mhm.
I know. God, the pressure we're under. Should have had a list
There's
ready.
no, there's so many, and
There
I mean,
is.
there's literally so many, and there's so many that are doing remarkable things in the world and really like challenging like mainstream perceptions and mainstream narratives. And there's this idea of Indigenous futurism. And so, if you had to define Indigenous futurism, what does that look like for you?
I don't know. What is Indigenous futurism? Like, in what
Well, what do you?
context?
Okay, well, maybe let's make it a bit easier. What does the future look like for you this year? What do you have for 2021?
A COVID shot. A COVID shot.
Yeah, yeah,
Travel,
yeah.
reconnecting, kinship, the act of kinship, and putting that and rectifying that again. Stories, like, and taking my daughter somewhere. Every year, she travels with me
Mhm,
someplace, and it's like this journey, this tradition. That's something that's for me and her, where we like meet up with a bunch of my friends, and like the isolation of 2020, like, can go screw itself.
yeah.
Um,
What would your advice be for the younger generation that, maybe does want to have a writing career or does want to go to school? What would your advice be for the younger gen?
I think for like our emerging writers, it's understanding that their voice is precious. I know when I was growing up, I was like, who wants like read about the res? Because that was my lived experience. Everybody. So understanding that your lived experience, no matter how small, is relevant and powerful and unique to you. And just to write it, write it, write it, write it. And it doesn't have to be perfect, and it won't be perfect. It'll be trash. But that's what editors are for.
true.
And for those who want to go to school, you know, I love it. As much as I bitch about it, I love it. I love learning.
Mhm.
I love the connections I get to make, and I love the opportunities. Like for the longest time, like this was how I traveled. Like as a single mother, I would not have the luxury of going to Toronto or Montreal or Ottawa or Vancouver
Mm.
or where have I been? Philadelphia or wherever
Mhm.
without school. It was those opportunities that like let me
Mm.
travel. So
Mhm.
knowing what it's worth. But like I said, go in when you're ready. School will always be there.
Exactly. I think that's like another programming we learn is like we should go to school as soon as we get out of high school. But really, education is always going to be there.
Mhm.
Um, how can people support your work, support your writing, purchase your books?
They're on my website, like tenillecampbell.com, or on my Instagram at sweetmoon photo. I have my links there. Nedi Nezu has been published through Arsenal Pulp Press, which is located in Vancouver, and they have been amazing. So you can order my book through them. And then Indigo and McNally have also been huge advocates of the book. So you can order through
Sweet.
their sites.
Oh, sweet. Can I go in store or is it just online?
No, they should be definitely in store.
Okay.
And then
Like I'm
I
gonna go
think
there
Arsenal
today.
has some signed copies.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Tenille, for joining me on this podcast and spilling the tea. Thank you, Hi, for your energy and for your sharing space, and also for sharing your good medicine in the world through your writing and your poetry. And I'm looking forward to what 2021 has in store for you.
Ooh, thank you for having me. It was good to see you.